For centuries, farmers have battled weeds, soil erosion, and nutrient loss. Yet, long before modern mulch materials, some ancient grains were quietly solving these problems on their own. These weren't high-maintenance crops or fancy hybrids. They were simple, resilient grains that acted as living mulches, covering soil, suppressing weeds, and feeding the ground without a single extra hand movement. When I discovered how these systems worked, it changed my approach to soil management entirely. This isn't theory. It's practical wisdom embedded in history that any gardener can adopt today. Why ancient grain ground covers were more than food crops. Historical records from Europe, Asia and Africa show that grains like barley, oats and certain millets were often sown in patterns not just for harvest, but for protection. They formed dense mats that shaded the soil, dropped leaves and stalks, and decomposed in place. The farmers didn't need to rake, chop or compost these residues. The plants created a self-renewing mulch system. This method preserved moisture, prevented erosion and encouraged soil life, all while producing edible yields. So, how do these grains mulch themselves naturally? Well, the secret lies in their growth habit and the way their residues are managed. Many ancient grains actually grow in overlapping clusters, sending out tillers and leaves that stretch horizontally across the soil. As the season goes on, the lower leaves start to die off, then fall, and they end up forming a thin, living layer right over the soil surface. Unlike modern monoculture crops, which, tend to leave the soil bare after harvest, these grains are continuously depositing organic matter and at the same time keeping sunlight from reaching those pesky weeds. Even after the upper growth dies back, the roots keep on feeding soil microbes, creating this living interface between the soil and the air. So, why does modern gardening often miss this strategy? Well, these days we rely on purchased mulches, synthetic mats, or honestly, labour-intensive compost applications. It's just assumed that protecting the soil always requires some extra work. But, you see, ancient systems really show the opposite. With strategic planting of the right species, you actually get a self-maintaining cover. The mistake is thinking mulch must be applied after growth rather than grown with it. Nature, as always, does the heavy lifting if given the chance. Let me share how I experimented with ancient grain ground covers in my own garden. I began by planting a mix of oats and barley in a small test plot, staggering sowing dates so some plants were always active while others matured. And I didn't cut back residues, pull leaves, or rake the soil. Within just a few weeks, a living carpet formed, suppressing weeds, shading bare patches, and slowly decomposing into the topsoil. Unlike straw or wood chip mulches, this layer never needed replenishing. It regrew, died back, and cycled continuously. Now, you might be wondering why the soil responded faster than with traditional mulch. Well, these grains create microclimates right at the soil surface. The living layer keeps moisture steady, stabilizes temperature, and provides food for fungi, bacteria, and worms. Organic matter is incorporated naturally as leaves fall and roots decay, making the whole process, quite seamless. Over time, the soil becomes looser, richer, and biologically active without the need for turning or manual amendment. In contrast, layered mulch often decomposes unevenly and requires repeated applications to achieve the same effect. It's a real difference you can feel with your hands, honestly. So, how do you select the right grains for your garden? Look for species with dense tillering, broad leaves and rapid growth. Oats, barley, rye and certain millets all work well, just to name a few. Be sure to avoid grains that grow too upright or thin, as they allow sunlight to reach the soil and weeds, which frankly is something you want to steer clear of. Intercropping with vegetables can also provide dual benefits, living mulch and partial harvest. This really does mimic the polyculture patterns used in ancient agriculture. Now, here's how to plant and manage them for, zero-work mulch. Sow in rows or scattered clusters, depending on your garden layout. It's a good idea to stagger planting to maintain continuous coverage. Let the leaves die naturally and remain on the ground. Water as needed, but do try to avoid any aggressive trimming. The goal here is a continuous cycle of growth, death, and decomposition. Over time, this system becomes self-sustaining, requiring only minimal intervention and quite naturally improving soil fertility. So, why do ground cover grains reduce weeds more effectively than traditional mulches? Well, because they are alive, these plants shade the soil uniformly, suppressing germination right at the source. Dead mulch materials, on the other hand, often allow gaps where weeds can exploit sunlight. Additionally, living roots exude compounds that stimulate beneficial microbes and, discourage certain pests. The combination of shading, chemical signaling and biological activity really creates an environment where weeds struggle and the soil truly thrives. Now, let's consider how this method aligns with sustainable and historical gardening practices. Ancient farmers simply did not have access to fertilizers, herbicides, or mechanical mulches. Instead, they relied on crop selection and timing to maintain soil health. By mimicking these strategies, modern gardeners can reduce labor, improve soil fertility, and enhance resilience against drought or erosion. The lesson is clear. The best mulch may not be something you apply. It may be something you grow. Why every gardener should consider integrating these grains. Beyond soil protection, living grain ground covers build fertility, increase biodiversity, and reduce maintenance. They require fewer inputs, survive fluctuations in weather, and encourage wildlife that supports soil health. Once established, the system practically runs itself, letting gardeners focus on planting, harvesting, and observation instead of constant mulch replacement. If this guide helped you see soil differently, make sure to subscribe to the Hydrohaven channel. Share this insight with gardeners, homesteaders, and history-minded growers who want a garden that works for them instead of against them. Ancient grain ground covers aren't just plants. They're partners in building resilient, self-sustaining soil.